Hello everyone, and welcome to NeoSystems webinar today, Positioning to Win, Leveraging the Cloud. This is our fourth in our series on Positioning to Win, everything your company knows to go from that company, when you're going after pursuing that company changing contract, whether it's going to be radically changing your size, doubling your size of your company. What do you need to do from a pricing point of view? We covered in our first webinar. We talked about the cash impacts of winning that large contract, and then looking at the cash compliance issues. And today, we're looking at leveraging the cloud. In future webinars, we'll be looking at recruiting. After you've won that contract, how are you going to recruit the people that you need to staff and deliver effectively? And then once you have all those people, there's going to be some HR compliance issues that will be impacting you. So this is the whole back office that we'll be taking a look at in this series, Positioning to Win. And at the end, we'll be wrapping it up with making a case for outsourcing these services, but that'll be out in July. So any of these webinars that you're interested in, please feel free to register. Our agenda today, we'll do some brief introductions, and then we'll be getting into the meat of our webinar, looking at setting a baseline, making sure everyone has the same definitions of cloud. Then we'll look at some models and mostly the roles and responsibilities. Who does what on these different options you have out there? Take a good look at the benefits, some concerns people have about moving to the cloud and how you can address them. Questions you might want to ask a cloud provider before moving to the cloud, and questions you might want to ask yourself as you develop your strategy of moving forward and into the cloud. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with your questions, and if at any time, though, you have a question during this webinar, please feel free to put that question into the question box, and we'll be sure to get to it at the end. First, a little brief introduction about NeoSystems. At NeoSystems, we focus on the back office. We do this for nonprofit, government contractors, and other high compliance companies. Sorry about that. We provide the accounting services. We're talking managed accounting. We manage your accounting for companies as well as providing accounting services on a project basis. We also manage your IT. This could be managing your servers, your email, as well as help desk. We also manage the human capital for people, recruiting, onboarding, all those compliance issues. These are the services that NeoSystems provides for our clients. Now this is a slightly busy slide, and I'll only touch on a few points, but let me highlight that we have 4 offices, including our headquarters here in Tysons Corner, Virginia. We also have a new office in Orlando, Florida. And in our secure private cloud, we are currently hosting over 475 companies. And those companies represent over 45,000 employees who are using our hosting environment every day. One last point I want to highlight about NeoSystems is that we have been on the Inc. 5000 list for the past 5 years. But what we're more proud of is that over 30 of our clients are on the Inc. 5000 list as well. So that's enough about us. Would like to get a little bit more information about you, kind of share this introduction. So if I could, let's go to a poll and learn a little bit about why you're joining our webinar today. What is your level of experience with the cloud? Are you already fully migrated to the cloud? Are you using some form of cloud services today but also have some on-premise? Are you looking to planning to move to the cloud in the next 6 months? Or have you started the planning process to the cloud and just starting to look at things? Or are you not considering the cloud? It's not part of your strategy. Kind of an interesting one there. It's, I'll be curious if you've chosen the 5th answer there, if you might put in a comment as to what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar if you're not considering the cloud. I'll give a few more seconds here, let a few more people answer the poll. We always get a few more people coming in. 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Let's share the results. Okay. Looks like the most popular answer is that some of you are using some form of cloud services today. And then we look down at starting the planning process to go to the cloud, and then a good number of you are not considering the cloud. Well, hopefully, as we go through this, we'll be able to touch on some of your concerns for moving to the cloud, help you, for those who are starting the planning process, we'll give you some things to consider, questions you should be asking yourself and your service providers. And for those of you who are already using some form of cloud, we'll be able to help you figure out how you can leverage it better. All right. Thanks. Let's close that poll out and move along here. With me today, I have David Kowal. He's our Director of Assurance for IT Services. David, take it away.
Thank you very much, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is David Kowal, and I've been really involved with IT and telecom for 20 years plus in various capacities throughout my career. I've spent a large time with various technologies, working really with service providers, Sprint for 10 years, MCI, Verizon, so on and so forth. And the background from a technology standpoint has really spanned the entire spectrum. I've worked fundamentally really with the federal government, over 18 years experience in civilian agencies, NASA, FBI, DOD, and so forth. And I am certified Cisco and VMware today. So with that, let's talk about the cloud. And it's such a big buzzword out there in the industry, and a lot of folks have heard the cloud, and it's really it's got different meanings to different people. We can look at cloud, and we can talk about, we will talk about some of the different service models, delivery models, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and so on and so forth, and how that fundamentally differs with the traditional co-location, managed hosting, and so forth. What I kind of consider as a cloud 101 or a precursor to cloud. And then with that, moving into cloud technology as a whole, we can really, it's safe to say at this point in time, it's a mature technology. It's not a commodity yet, but it's proven. We've really done experimenting with this. We've moved beyond the trough of illusion and past the slope of enlightenment. It's really a consumption model that we'll look at. There's various different types of deployment models and service models, and then we'll get into some specific examples there. Lastly, here we'll look at how do we leverage this cloud to grow my business or to grow your business? What are the choices out there that we have, and how do we become more efficient and so forth? When we look at the different deployment models out there, we can really break it down into three fundamental tiers. When we look at a private cloud, or think of a private cloud, we're looking at really kind of a single customer type owned managed environment that's either operated by or managed by the client themselves or a third-party outsourced provider. The private cloud really is thought of as on-premise. It's on your own customer location. But then again, it can be hosted outside as well. But the overarching theme here is it's one client, it's a private cloud dedicated to you. When we move into or think about public cloud, now we're talking about really a ubiquitous kind of model that's deployed and delivered, provided for everyone out there for consumption. And when we think of public cloud, we also think about the different types of delivery models and service models that are provided out there. We mentioned IaaS and PaaS and software service, and we'll get into some of these specifics as we go move along through the slides here. Lastly, when we talk about hybrid cloud, and this is very much prevalent in the space today, what we're saying here is it's really a combination of the above two. So a lot of organizations will have an existing private cloud, and they may have exhausted some of the resources on-prem, and they want to take advantage and leverage some of the cloud providers' platform out in the cloud. The combination of these two is really thought of as a hybrid cloud model. We can basically move workloads in and out seamlessly and so forth. That's fundamentally the idea behind a hybrid cloud. But the essential characteristics here is really on-demand, self-service, a resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and it's a model based on consumption. If we look at specifically at some of the service models out there, we talked about this previously. To dive a little bit deeper into this, there's different service models that a lot of providers out there provide, and it's kind of morphed and evolved as time has gone on. Some of the providers that you've thought of as in one particular service delivery model have really expanded to go beyond that and offer additional services as well, or different capabilities, additional capabilities. So infrastructure as a service, this is a model basically that allows you to consume resources on demand, basically being able to add in additional CPU or RAM or memory or storage capacity on the fly. When we look at a platform as a service model for the developers out there, this is really a platform for folks to come out and be able to design different software, different applications on a provided platform by the provider. Some of the examples out there we can look at are Google Apps or Azure as an example here. When we move down to software as a service, this is really a delivery model where the provider has complete control of the environment from the application level all the way down the stack to the physical environment. They're responsible soup to nuts, and they provide essentially an application that is consumed by many different clients. This is a pay-as-you-go type of a model delivery. Now, outside of just infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, there's other models as well, or other service models, and we can talk about database as a service or application as a service, or very importantly and relative is a disaster recovery as a service. So as we move forward, you'll see these different service models provide or expand. Now, this slide here, what we're looking at is really a depiction of what we just talked about. So this is another way of looking at it. It's kind of like an OSI-like model, but if you look at this, fundamentally what we're saying here is it's the separation of responsibilities. If you look at the blue items in blue, this is what the customer yourself is really responsible for and maintaining. So in the column on the left, this is the private cloud model. Now, this could be on-prem or outside of your environment, but fundamentally the provider, the client has the ultimate control management of the entire stack. And as we move to the different cloud delivery platforms out there, what happens is you see that the roles of responsibility migrate. And again, the blue is still customer managed, and then the gray is service provider managed. So as we move through these different types of service models, you can see that in infrastructure as a service, the bottom of the stack is controlled by the provider. They're going to maintain and manage those things, where the client has the ability to control the applications, the data, and so forth. With an infrastructure as a service model, additionally, the client does have the ability to spin up different workloads, adjust the memory for those workloads, RAM, CPU resources, as well as storage and networking. Moving forward, platform as a service, this is again really for the developers out there that have a platform provided by the service provider where maybe you're working with different applications, you're trying to build new products and services and so forth. Platform as a service is a kind of a model that may be applicable to you. All the way to the right here of the diagram, we talk about software as a service, and a really big example here, real-world example, would be like a Office 365 or Salesforce.com. You're just a user that, if you've got a web browser or a thin client, you can access, with internet access, you can access the provider's website, and they basically give you access to their software but everything behind the scenes is managed and maintained and controlled by the service provider. Now, as we move forward and we take a look at co-location and hosting, this is really kind of this has been around for decades. This is really what I kind of consider, Cloud 1.0, or the precursor to what we consider cloud consumption today. But traditional co-location goes back many, many years, and that's the clients not wanting to maintain their servers and their equipment. They outsource that to a co-location provider. They basically, put that into a data center facility where the provider manages the power, the cooling, the space, the physical footprint, but the customer still has control, again, represented here in blue, in terms of being able to do what they want to do with that components, the servers. They can add new infrastructure and so forth, and with the provider. As we move forward again to the right here of this diagram, fundamentally what happens is the separation of roles and responsibilities again change and move over to the right. So again, the gray colors is really the service provider being able to manage and manage co-location setting. They're managing the different components, and the client is really outsourcing that control to the service provider. In a managed hosting, all the way to the right here, what we're looking at is the service provider basically handling everything soup to nuts, managing your applications for you, managing the patches, the upgrades, the hot fixes, and so forth, really getting down deeper into a role of looking at everything from top to bottom and providing that level of skill set there. But what we want to also convey here is that when we look at a co-location or a hosting play, managed hosting play, it's different from the former slide on the software as a service model. Again, both sides look like they were all gray, right, on the right-hand column, but fundamentally, SaaS provides a single instance of software to all customers. So these applications are then typically run, on a standard browser or a thin client, as we mentioned, but many different customers can access that piece of software. So the software is like Salesforce. Many different clients can access that. They can set up different parameters to their likings and settings and so forth. But there's only one instance of the software shared by many clients, and all data is generally in the same database. But it's different from a managed hosting environment where when you're talking about a managed hosting environment, we treat each customer separately from the standpoint of the software. So the software is not just, it's not for everyone. The software is for one particular client, and the service provider manages that particular software in the entire stack. But it's a one-to-one kind of a relationship there in terms of the software, the application, and the client. So there's a fundamental difference there. And additionally, managed service providers or managed hosting providers can provide dedicated personnel on site, like a full-time equivalency. Maybe it's an application that's pretty involved and pretty extensive, an accounting application or something where you may need to have dedicated resources there to help manage that application. This really comes and falls under the auspice of a managed hosting provider, and NeoSystems very much fits into this role here in this category.
Okay, David. Appreciate you giving us those definitions, setting, kind of level setting us all so we have a common foundation from which to proceed. Now, just before we get into the concerns, the benefits, and all that fun stuff, I wanted to make it a little more fun and throw in a Neo trivia question here. And so here's how the game is played. You enter your answer in the question box, and the first person to correctly answer the question wins a $10 Starbucks card. So here's our first question. How many companies are hosted in Neo's secure private cloud? So if you were paying attention in the beginning or happen to just know this, that would be great. First person to type in the answer. We'll give everybody a chance to enter. The correct answer is over 575 clients are in Neo Secure Private Cloud. Thank you very much for all of you who played our little game. We'll be getting a $10 Starbucks card out to the winner. All right, I hope that was fun for everybody. And now I'm going to turn it back to David, who's going to get into the benefits, the concerns you may have, and take it away, David.
Thank you very much, Brian. As we look at some of the benefits when we talk about leveraging the cloud environment, there's a number of them. I've listed a few here that I think are really kind of the key benefits and what's paramount. Cost. Everybody's worried about cost, doing more with less. It's really kind of changing the model of going away from CapEx expenditures and moving to an OpEx model, pay-as-you-go model. This really kind of frees up a lot of the capital needed to build or to purchase equipment and what have you on-prem. If we can move to a pay-as-you-go model, more of a utility-based, we're really kind of benefiting there from a cost-saving standpoint. The next benefit here is, outsourcing your IT really kind of enables the client yourself to focus on your core competencies, your business. Maybe you're a manufacturer of some type. You're spending countless hours today worried about IT. We can outsource that to the service providers and have you really focus on your core competencies and your overall your main business objectives. If we look at experts and we talk about having the staff on board, it can be quite expensive. Looking at outsourcing to people that do cloud consumption and cloud management on a day-to-day basis, that's really a benefit here. Where a lot of companies don't have that kind of resources in-house. They're very expensive, and if we outsource that to the experts in the arena, the folks that manage it and do it, live it and breathe it, do it on a day-to-day basis, that's really kind of one of the major benefits of leveraging the cloud. Compliance is, and we'll talk about this as we move forward specifically about different regulations and governance and compliance. What we're talking about here really is leveraging a provider that already has those types of compliances, mandates or governance in place today. That way you're not worried about having to have your own facility become up to speed or up to standards from a regulatory standpoint, spending the money to do that. So again, another benefit moving out to a service provider. Some of the possible concerns that we look at here, and there's always concerns. As you build your cloud strategy, you look at the pros and cons, obviously. Some of the things that, a lot of clients will often say, well, we've made a substantial investment, in existing architecture. We bought a lot of servers and storage. What do we do with this? These are some of the things that we look at when we talk about concerns with migrating to the cloud. And there are answers to address these very concerns. Security, big buzzword. Security, and this means different things to different people, but sometimes we often see that some applications just don't work well, and they have to be really kept on-prem. And it could be some old legacy applications that are highly sensitive where security is very paramount. So that's another concern that comes up as well. Applications.
David? We were talking about security. I hope you don't mind me interrupting there. But, one of the things when people look at security and the concern of security in the cloud, I mean, I'm often wonder, when even the White House servers got broken into last week, what is the security of your current environment versus the security of the hosted environment? I think, we can't look at security as in a perfect ideal, but into what are you doing? And I think as people look at their concerns, I think that's part of the balance they need to compare. What's my current security posture? What would be my security posture in the cloud? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely, Brian. That's well said. I think that as we move forward through the slides here, we'll take a look at that more specifically as well. But security, again, comes in different flavors, and it means a lot of things to different people. We can talk about physical security, and with biometrics, we can talk about data at rest. We can talk about encryption, cryptography, AES-256, data in flight. What's really happening with my data as I move that data that's very sensitive out into the cloud, and these are definitely some of the things to address, absolutely. As we look further here at some of the other concerns, applications, some mission critical applications, it depends on your, what you do and what kind of applications you're running, but there are oftentimes a concern about moving that mission critical. This is my bread and butter application, and we can't have it's completely the source of revenue. We can't have any issues here, so we have to make sure that we do diligence, making sure that the application that is very mission critical survives well in the cloud, backed by strong SLAs, to make sure that we don't have any issues with performance and so forth. So if we look at, overall about hosting providers, and some of the things that the hosting providers have done in order to be more secure and take the pain points away from what you guys do on a day-to-day basis, this is really very significant. The providers out there have made the investments in being compliant with very different stringent security controls mandated by the federal government, NIST or FISMA or FedRAMP, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. But these are some of the things that you're getting as you leverage an outsourced provider that have gone through the gamut of making sure that their infrastructure meets the different mandates from a governance standpoint, taking the pain away from the clients having to worry about doing that in-house or internally, so you can rest assured that you're doing diligence, making sure that the provider that you choose has gone through that level of effort to make sure that they have those compliances in place. And lastly, strategy. I mean, this really boils down to, a lot of times we hear that clients just don't have a cloud strategy. They're not really sure about what's really best for them. And I kind of look at it as a case-by-case basis, looking at what your core competencies are, what do you do, what is your business type. If you can leverage, an outsource model from an IT perspective, it may behoove you in many areas. You can, again, focus on your line of business, outsourcing the security components, the availability components, the scalability, the elasticity, the agileness of some of the things that the cloud can bring to light and benefit you overall. So some of the questions, and there's a number of questions to ask your providers as you're going through trying to come up with your cloud strategy, but these are some of the things that we believe that are paramount, and some of the things that you should look at. I mean, depending on your organization and what you need to adhere to from a governance standpoint, a compliance standpoint, maybe HIPAA is something that if you're in healthcare and health insurance type of a vertical, some of these things may be paramount to you. PCI DSS, payment card industry, ITAR compliance, and so forth. So these are the things that I would ask the service provider that you're looking at, hey, do you comply with these standards? And this is fundamental. As we move forward, looking at some of the other questions, looking at the cost, what is it going to cost me to move workloads to the cloud or move equipment to the cloud? Are there hidden costs? Oftentimes we'll see out there that vendor A and cloud provider B really differ from each other from the standpoint of what they provide you, what they include in the monthly recurring charge. I've seen, firewalls or load balancers as add-on items depending on the cloud provider that you're talking to. So understand, read the fine print, understand what the initial costs are and the hidden costs as well. Now, as we move forward, we look at some of the other questions to think about when we talk with cloud service providers, and we're doing comparing out there. What are the SLAs? SLA is such a big word, and oftentimes you hear, oh, we're 4 nines, we're compliant, and we offer 5 nines, and what does that really mean? And are there service credits that are backed behind those? If a provider, they may offer 4 nines, that really comes down to 4 minutes for the month. So if we look at some of the things that are stated in the SLA, we've got to make sure there's teeth to the SLA as well, and they're actually backed by stringent service credit agreements and so forth. So again, another area to dive a little bit deeper into, what can your business tolerate? If you're an e-commerce business, as an example, and it's during the height of your busy season, and you're down for 43 minutes during high peak times, is that okay for you? These are some of the things to ask yourself. Is 3 nines? Is that gonna cut it for my business? And look at what are the service credits that they provide back to you as well. When we get into management and we look at, I've moved equipment to the cloud, I've moved different workloads to the cloud. How do we, uncover, ask specifically who's configuring the devices, VMs, who's optimizing, who's maintaining it? Can the provider do all of this? Where's the lines of demarcation? So this is very fundamental too in terms of looking at the overall manageability of the environment from the different service providers out there. They're all very, very different. When we look at disaster recovery, this is not something that generally is given to you automatically. This is a separate add-on type of item depending on who you're working with. So as you move data to the cloud, you've got to look at disaster recovery. What happens in the event of a disaster, whether that's Mother Nature or man-made type of a disaster? You've got to understand where are their different data centers located? Are they geographically dispersed? Is it, what type of replication are they doing from one data center to another? Is it active? I mean, so disaster recovery is another thing that a lot of folks, sometimes don't really look into continuity of operations. So this is something very paramount to look at when you're assessing different providers out there. Another great tool for kind of assessing things is looking at third-party consultants. These people spend, that's their job really, to spend day in and day out time assessing the different parties or providers out there rather. And the Cloud Security Alliance is a great example. If you look at some of their work that they're doing, they look at the different controls, stipulated by FISMA or FedRAMP or NIST, and they look and see which providers out there really conform to some of these very stringent type of controls that are set forth by the federal government. If you look at the questionnaire, very, very important information to kind of leverage. The work's been done, from the standpoint of trying to assess and see who's out there, what they can provide, and so forth. So another benefit is taking a look at some of this third-party consultant work. As we wrap up here, or begin to wrap up here, we'll look at some of the things that you can really ask yourself. What matters to me? What's important to me as I think about moving and adopting a cloud strategy approach? Is efficiency what I'm really trying to benefit? If I'm risk adverse, maybe I'm not willing to really look at some of the bleeding edge providers out there. It may not apply to me. Can I, avoid the risk or accept the risks? Is speed important to me? Is compliances and governance important to me? Am I trying to reduce the costs within IT? So these are some of the things that we can look at and ask ourselves. We do some introspection to really understand where are we at today. What are the things that we want to do to get out of a cloud adoption strategy? And if you look at the labor costs out there, and IDC did the research on this, and these where these numbers come from, and an average sysadmin looking at an average typical salary is $91,000 minimum. And if you tack on the fringe cost, benefits and so forth, your loaded costs are over $200,000. That's just for one person. So, do I want to make the investment in IT in-house, or do I want to focus more on my core competencies and go away from a CapEx model and leverage an OpEx model really to satisfy some of these, outsourcing to the IT experts that have gone through the compliances and governance type of checklist, going through from a security standpoint, having the ability to handle all different types of workloads and being very agile and so forth. These are some of the things to look at as you really kind of think about your overall cloud strategy approach and what's important to you, and then asking again the questions that we mentioned of the service providers themselves. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to.
Yeah, let's stay here for 1 second, if we could. David, you were mentioning. I see one of your bullets here: avoiding risk or accepting risk, and I realized that as we went through it, that can actually be a little bit confusing. Am I accepting risk by going to the cloud, or am I avoiding risk by going to the cloud?
Well, it's really a matter of looking at the security posture that you have for yourself as an entity. What are some security postures that are important to me? And if by going and leveraging a cloud provider, do they have the same levels of security posture? If they don't, then are we willing to accept that risk? Are we maybe they've covered all the security concerns that you may have, so you're avoiding risk by moving to a provider that has fundamentally gone through the litmus or gamut in terms of being proficient in satisfying all of the different controls from a security standpoint.
Interesting. So I'm actually transferring the risk to the service provider if by moving to the cloud and instead of accepting it and making it my job. Now I've made it somebody else's job. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
All right, let's open this up to another poll questions, because now that we've talked about these concerns and these benefits, what are the business? Some of you have talked about you're moving to the cloud, you're planning to move to the cloud. So what are the business drivers that are in the back of your mind as you're considering your cloud strategy and your use of the cloud? And please check as many as you like here. Are you? Oh, I'm sorry. It was supposed to be my apologies. Please select one. So is it the flexibility and scalability of IT resources? David mentioned that there was only one person costs you so much, but can you get somebody who's an expert in email servers and configuring firewalls? I mean, that's scalability. I just need 15 minutes or a couple hours of a firewall expert and 2 hours of a mail server expert. One of the drivers, move OpEx versus CapEx, that cash flow issue there. Are you looking at business continuity and disaster recovery? Big concerns there. Derechos come through, hurricanes come through. Heck, even buildings have fires and break-ins. What's your plan there? Or are you looking to outsource some of those IT experts? Leverage that. Or you might have other concerns. If you have other concerns, please feel free to write what they are in the question box. All right, let's take a look at our results. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Share the results. Yes, and business continuity and disaster recovery, very big issue for half of you. So not surprising, that is a big issue. If you're looking at your on-premise configuration and what you can do there, what are your options? Flexibility and scalability of IT resources, dead on. So we understand that completely. So hopefully this webinar has helped you to get some insights into that. All right, let's close the poll, and we want to start opening it up to your questions. So start writing your questions into your questions box. As you're writing them in, let me just wrap up. We're covering today leveraging the cloud. If you have any interest in some of our previous webinars, they will be available on demand from our website. We also have future webinars coming up on human capital issues, which you can register for. All right, so let's open it up to your questions. And we always get the one question: will a copy of this webinar be made available? Yes. For all of you who attended today, we will make a copy of the webinar available. And David, I'll let you start taking a look at these questions. Good number of questions coming in, so we appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll talk about the first question here. Will I see performance or response time problems if I move my applications to the cloud? I can tell you this, that's not the case here with NeoSystems. We've actually done extensive testing on that from different testing points all around the globe. So basically being able to reach back to the data center that's hosting your applications and so forth, round-trip millisecond times have not been an issue from our extensive testing. So to answer that question rather succinctly, there hasn't been any issue there from our testing perspective.
Thanks, David. And if you don't mind, I'll pose the question and let you answer. I'll take the easy job. The SLAs you talked about, those service level agreements, yeah, you mentioned 5 nines, 3 nines. You know, why wouldn't everybody just insist upon 5 nines?
Well, the answer there is really how much are you willing to spend? I mean, it comes down to you know, the provider to be able to offer 5 nines availability. That comes out to almost like 8 minutes of downtime for the entire year. So it comes at a cost perspective from the provider to be able to provide that you know, level of availability, and you know, oftentimes it really depends on the provider out there, what you're looking at, and so forth. So, you know, it comes down to how much money are you going to spend. If you're looking at 5 nines availability, and that's a requirement, generally speaking, it's going to be a lot more cost to you because you've got the built-in redundancies, you've got the built-in you know, high availability or fault tolerance mechanisms in place to be able to support that. That comes at a cost.
Okay, and when we look at those costs, you know, we have, you know, one of the things, I guess it depends on what the application is. If you're running an ERP, you know, one level of availability might be okay, whereas the, you know, like you said, your e-commerce situation is very, very different. You know, you want that available all the time. You also mentioned, and I see a question here for service credits. I mean, what are you talking about there? You know, could you explain what service credits are? Because somebody obviously didn't know what they were and asked a question. So if you could explain that.
Absolutely. Essentially, you know, service credits is quite simply put dollars. It's money credited back to the client if the provider has not lived up to they've stated they can handle 3 nines of availability. If for whatever reason they're down for longer than that, and there's service impacts to the customer that go beyond that allotted amount of time within the month, then service credits are applied back to the, generally it's in the form of an account credit to the client.
Okay, so real cash money, put your money where your mouth is. That's good. Now look to see if there's oh, here comes another one. Is it easy to move to the cloud? I have to say that's a loaded question, isn't it?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely. It really comes down to assessing what your environment looks like, what are your needs, what kind of things are you trying to do. And when you work with a provider, and oftentimes you're really consulting, working together with the service provider that you've selected to look at, and then it comes down to what things are you comfortable with moving to the cloud. Generally speaking, we'd like to do something that's low priority first, like a test and dev type of an application, not mission critical. We really want to kind of leverage, you know, some of the things that aren't really that important to you if something goes down. This is really kind of a testing scenario that you use with your provider, but fundamentally, no, it's not difficult at all.
Okay. So what model, you mentioned the different models during our presentation. So the question that comes in, what model would be best if my IT team isn't a cloud expert?
Well, that's going to be a managed hosting type of a model, really. If you don't have the internal resources to be able to satisfy all of your different IT objectives, stay current, be able to be agile and expand, and basically to be able to deploy applications to meet the expectations of the line of business, then we're really behind. And the line of business is really kind of focused on agility, speed, having things readily available immediately. If you don't have that type of expert in-house, we leverage the cloud managed hosting providers that can be able to have a specific experience in the application, be able to provide the expertise in terms of managing on a day-to-day basis, applying hot fixes and patches. So you're really outsourcing those types of problems to the cloud expert. So again, I think that the managed hosting type of a scenario would work best in that model.
Interesting. Yeah, I have a related question here, and I think that's going to feed right in, dovetail with your last question. Can any size company move to the cloud? And I get the feeling that they're thinking from a smaller size, but maybe you can look at talk to that smaller company where they're moving, and I think that fits right in with your last question and answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, cloud it's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It comes down to looking at your strategy, looking at what your core competencies are, what are some of the things that you're really focused on from a business perspective, and if you're a 20-man shop and you've got your focus is on, building windows, you don't have necessarily the expertise in-house to manage the IT equipment and so forth. There's no issue there with leveraging a managed provider to take care of that type of environment. Absolutely. So it scales, it really scales from the smallest type of, we'll call it mom and pop type shop that's new, starting up a business, and if they don't have the expertise in-house, they can very much leverage, because that really kind of gives them a cost savings from a standpoint of, not having to do a, upfront spending a lot of money on equipment and so forth. They can outsource to a provider that has that already.
Okay. And I think somewhere here, earlier in the presentation, you mentioned disaster recovery and disaster recovery as a service. What is that in relationship to all these other cloud options?
Well, absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, it's a matter of when you are, moving to a cloud model. Oftentimes, disaster recovery is a secondary thought. It's not something that a lot of folks think about. They're leveraging the cloud, but we need to really think about, what happens if the provider loses a data center? What happens to my data? Is it being replicated and backed up to an off-site disaster recovery location? NeoSystems here operates different locations for primary type of day-to-day work, and then we have a disaster recovery facility that is geographically dispersed, and we do replication backups and so forth to the secondary location. And so it really comes down to what are your requirements. We look at disaster recovery should very much be as in plan or in line with your strategy and your adoption as well as you think about moving to a cloud.
Okay. And I guess disaster recovery it's just not for, it could also be applied to the on-premise company, a company who's hosting their own stuff. They could use disaster recovery as a service as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. If you're operating a private cloud today on-prem, that's really what disaster recovery is all about, having a secondary facility that you're not having to pay for in terms of the physical space. You can leverage a cloud provider and leverage their data centers that they have in many parts of the country. You can say, well, my facility is here in Washington, D.C., but I'd like to have a geographically dispersed disaster recovery location that's anywhere else in the country, that I'm not renting and paying for the space, the power, the cooling, and so forth. I can leverage that and use it really as a utility model. So in the event that there's some kind of a unforeseen disaster, I know that I have peace of mind that my data is protected off-site in a secure facility.
Good point. Yeah, and as we all have seen, we've seen the derechos, the hurricanes, and everything else. So we've all. It doesn't take much to realize that a disaster is possible, and nobody likes to. You don't think about it until they happen, and then you say, "Oh gosh, now what?" But we've had a few examples in the last few years that have been kind of hit home on all this message. So I think this has been great, and I really, I think we've been have a pleasure talking with you, and I hope I can see a lot of people got a lot out of this. So we're going to wrap this up, and if you have questions, if we didn't get to your question, there were a couple of questions that came in that we're going to take up offline. But if you have more questions, please feel free to email David or myself, and our email addresses are there. And again, we'll be getting out the presentation to everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining NeoSystems today in our position for this Leveraging the Cloud, the fourth in our series of Positioning to Win. Thank you, everyone.